Good afternoon. One would think that being the school holidays, I would have been like all over this and been right on time with coming on in to my 5 on Friday at 4 o'clock. But no, it's like 10 minutes past 4 because hello, holidays. Anyway, I have got five really, an eclectic bunch this afternoon. They are all so very different, but I have deeply enjoyed each of them. And I will jump right in with my first one, which is The Underhills, a Tooth Fairy story. It is by, oh my gosh, like the man just makes me want to weep with the beauty of his books. Bob Graham. I mean, what is not to love about a Bob Graham book? So this one is a companion book to April Underhill, A Tooth Fairy Story, which came out maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I have read April Underhill probably 50 to 60 to 70 times. I could probably recite it to you. So I have to admit, I did squeal with joy when this arrived in the mail for me to review, because I could just see straight away that it was a companion novel to April Underhill, which is just one of my all-time favourite stories. There is nothing not to love about a Tooth Fairy story. There is nothing not to love about a Bob Graham book and all of the tiny, tiny, beautiful details he imbues into each of his books. I love everything about fairies, and the Tooth Fairy has always been my favourite fairy. So anyway, I will stop. I will show you. So it's really important with a Bob Graham book that you look at the end papers and the imprint page. He always starts his stories on the end papers. So here we've got an idea of context. We can see down here the teapot house that the Underhills live in, and we can see that they probably live near the airport. Then on this page here is some of the most beautiful words in the whole story, and he did this in April Underhill as well. And then we've got another wordless page, which is really important to have a look at and explore with young readers. And then we've got the title page and the imprint page. So all of those preceding pages are really important to look at in a Bob Graham book. And I know I bang on about end papers, but they're just such an important part of a picture book. So yeah. Here we've got the Underhills flying toward their grandparents' house, their little teapot house, and they are staying for the weekend because the Underhill parents have to go to work because there's been an urgent molar pickup. While they are off on their urgent molar pickup, a job comes in that is to pick up a tooth that has fallen out of a young toddler who is coming into Australia on a flight from Ghana. And so the children kind of beg their parents to let them have a go at this particular tooth fairy pickup. Just look at the gorgeous details in here. We've got dandelions, we've got a grandfather with a gorgeous ponytail and his ear pierced. I love the way Bob Graham just puts these little elements into his stories that are just fun. You know, Grandma's got stripy stockings. She's just really cool. Granddad's trying to keep really fit. He punches a tea bag. There is just nothing not to love. There really isn't. I didn't even wait for my kids to read this book. I sat down and I just read it straight away as soon as I took it out of the letterbox, because it's a Bob Graham book. It's just, he gets it so, so, so right. Granddad is reading his favourite book, which is a poem for every day of the year, and his little grandson Vincent is asleep. So worried that he might also fall asleep himself as he's reading, he ties them both together in case Vincent floats away. It's just so beautiful. Anyway, Grandma takes the younger kids, Esme and April, off to collect the tooth that has fallen out of this young toddler arriving from Ghana. And here we are in the airport, and there's guardian angels and cupids flying around as well. And they all have special jobs to do. Now, the grandma is called Ophelia, which is the name of Chickpea's fairy at home. And I don't know if any of you saw my Facebook post the other day, but Chickpea's been really, really a bit cranky about her lack of fairy action, and I have told her that Ophelia has probably been on a very long holiday, so I think Ophelia may have to make a reappearance now that we've got this book in the house. It's just gorgeous. The fairies and the angels and the cupids do different things at the airport. So the cupids help people to meet, and the angels do sad arrivals, but they also help people with pushing their luggage trolleys. Oh my gosh, it's just glorious. The details in it are just exquisite. And then we have this gorgeous little girl arriving from Ghana, and it's very important that tooth fairies are not seen Look at them arriving into her. They come down past her hair, they land on her ear, and they know that the fallen out tooth is in her pocket, and they need to replace the tooth with a coin. It's exquisite. I just cannot recommend it highly enough. And as many Bob Graham books do, it ends with kids going to sleep in different beds with the moon outside, you know, different but similar. Just so glorious. And again, please read the final little notation at the end of the book, and then we come to the final end paper again. It is glorious. There is nothing not to love about this book. It is glorious. A good one for people who may have imminent tooth fairy action happening in their house. Next, I want to show you a book which isn't really a book. It's Australia All Wrapped Up, and it's designed by Alice Ower. It's a Hardy Grant Egmont publication, and my mum actually got me this one for my birthday. She got me a book like this, an Art Nouveau one, back in my I was going to say my 18th, but that would be a really long time ago. I don't know. She got me an Art Nouveau version of this book donkeys years ago, and I just adored it, and I was really excited when we found this one as well. In it there are 12 sheets of wrapping paper, 24 gift tags, stickers, greeting cards, and envelopes, and they're beautifully designed. You rip these out and use them as wrapping paper. If you were into scrapbooking, which I am not, did you see that little nose? I am not into that. I just don't have time. Although Pudster is very into her bullet journal at the moment, and she is eyeing off some of the elements in this book, particularly the stickers. And then there's envelopes, and I've made one of the envelopes to show you. This one's got koalas on the outside and desert peas, which are one of my favourite Australian native plants. And you just cut them out, fold them up, glue them. There's cards as well. There's gift tags. I think this would make a fabulous present for a tween or teen. I mean, I'm 43, but I still really enjoyed it. I love wrapping gifts. I love giving gifts. And yeah, this is just, I love it. It's just absolutely glorious. So there's a few different versions of this sort of thing. Most of them are done by Hardy Grant. I've linked to the one that I'm showing, but there are a few other sorts as well. I really, really like it. Okay, my next book is Hey Gran Dude, and it is written by Paul McCartney and illustrated by Catherine Durst. Now, it is a celebrity book, and I feel quite strongly about celebrity books. I very often don't love them. In fact, I very often get a little bit cranky about them. And before I even received this book, I did read a bit of criticism of it, that it didn't really add anything new to the picture book landscape, and that it was a bit ho-hum. I kind of disagree. I really, really enjoyed it. It could be because I love stories about grandparents, and because I think Paul McCartney must be a pretty good Gran Dude. I think he would be cool. So his grandkids apparently in real life call him Gran Dude, and it starts with him and his grandchildren, who he calls the Chillers, hanging out at home, and they're spending the weekend with him, and it's raining outside, and they're a bit bored, and Gran Dude pulls out a pile of postcards from various different places, and then this magic compass spins and transports them to some of the places. Yes, it is a tried and true storyline, but you know what? I actually think it really works, and I actually don't think there's any problem with having some absolute just escapist fun. I really like it. I can imagine grandparents reading this with their grandchildren and having a lot of fun with it, and I just think it's one of those really, really fun picture books. It has a really great audio edition as well, which Paul McCartney narrates. There's some music on it, which is really nice. Obviously, this is a good one to get for grandparents who might be Beatles fans. But it's just a really nice grandparent-themed picture book. And I don't think we can have too many of those, because in an age where we as parents are all incredibly busy, grandparents often have a huge amount to do with our children, and I think it's really nice to celebrate them. So I super duper liked Hey Gran Dude. Thought it was fab. Moving on to a much heavier story. This is White Bird by Ajay Palacio, who wrote Wonder and Augie and Me. Now, White Bird expands on Julian's story. So Julian was the bully in Wonder, and then his story was expanded on a little bit as well. But this one is a graphic novel. It's a graphic novel. It's R.J. Palacios' first graphic novel. It's really beautiful. It's incredibly distressing. It starts with Julian having to do an assignment for homework where he rings up his Jewish grandmother and he has to interview her about her life. And she doesn't really want to talk about her life, but eventually she says, I think it's time. And then we start. And there's all these really beautiful quotes which start each of the sections. Once upon a time is how most fairy tales begin, and that is how I will start my story too, because my life truly began as a fairy tale. And it talks about Julian's grandmother's life in France and her beautiful, beautiful parents and fields of bluebells, and it's glorious. The illustrations, I believe, were done by Palacio with a graphic artist or an illustrator. I believe that she drew them, but then they've been inked digitally. They're absolutely beautiful. Then the war begins when France surrendered to Germany in June of 1940. And we then obviously go into a pretty tricky time in history, and the story becomes a lot darker and quite very upsetting. I often read a graphic novel in one sitting because I find it easier to keep the thread of the story happening for me. I'm not quite sure what that says about me as a reader of graphic novels, but I actually had to read this one over a week of breakfasts. I would sit down every morning with my coffee and ignore my children and read it. I couldn't read the whole thing at once. It was just too sad. This is definitely a book for older readers. So Pudster is 11, but I don't think she is quite ready for this story yet. A lot of my grade 6 students, and she is in grade 6, are very, very into World War II stories and would be absolutely fine with this. But like I always say on my blog, and I've said in my book multiple times, you just need to look at your individual child's maturity, and I definitely don't think this is a story for her just yet. I can give her any book on grief, but this one I don't think she's just quite ready for yet. It's quite an upsetting story. Of course it is. Now, what is interesting is that the author is not herself Jewish, and initially I thought, ooh, here we go. But she's got a really interesting author's note at the back where she says, although I am married to a Jewish man, I'm not Jewish myself. I know there may be some people who question whether I even have the right to tell this story, fictional as it is, because the Holocaust is not my story to tell. My feeling is that it should not fall solely on the victims of the Holocaust and their descendants to tell the story of the Holocaust. It should fall on everyone to remember, to teach, to mourn the loss. It's actually dedicated to her mother-in-law. So she is married to a Jewish man, and it's dedicated to her mother-in-law, and she talks about her mother-in-law at the conclusion of the story. There is also an afterword by Ruth Franklin, the extensive author's note. There's also an extensive glossary, which I found incredibly helpful and informative. And there is also a suggested reading list, organisations and resources that you might like to connect with, a bibliography and image credits and acknowledgements. I thought it was exquisite, and it's very much a story of kindness, which is why I think they've branded it a wonder story, because Wonder was also very much a story of kindness and empathy and compassion, as White Bird is. This beautiful bird appears throughout the story on multiple occasions, and I imagine those of us who are into literary tattoos, I imagine a few White Bird tattoos are going to pop up based on this book. I also really liked at the end that we come back to Julian. Grandma finishes telling her story. She's found it really hard, but Julian hangs up the phone and Grandma is looking at Trump's front page of the paper where it says children separated from parents as part of Trump's zero tolerance policy. And at the end here we have the white bird flying out. We're obviously back in contemporary America now, and we've got this protest happening here, and I'm pretty sure that one's a reference to the separation of families at the US-Mexico border, because it says no wall in here, and there's that newspaper reference. So I feel like it's also you know, it's asking us not to repeat the mistakes of the past. I thought it was beautiful, and this story will stay with me for a long time. I can't recommend it highly enough. And now I'm going to change pace again, and I'm going to show you Monuments by Will Kostakis. Now, I will be very upfront and say I really love everything Will Kostakis writes. I have had him as an author at my school on several occasions now, and I just think he's such a powerful voice in our literary community in Australia, in the YA space and middle grade space, and he's done a few upper primary books as well. I just think he's such an important and powerful voice. So I was probably always going to enjoy this book. I will say I didn't love the cover at first. I'm still not sure how I feel about the cover, but now having read the book, I understand a bit more about the cover. So there's going to be two. It's a duology, and the second book is going to be called Rebel Gods, and it comes out in 2020 sometime. I'm assuming Will is writing it now. This is so much fun. It's about a young Greek Australian boy, Connor, who has just pretty much had a divorce from his best friend, and he's really trying to avoid his best friend. So he's done something he's never done before. He wags a day of school. He's at an elite private boys' school in Sydney, and he wags school for the day, and he goes down to a chamber. He stumbles across a secret chamber in the basement of his school, where he meets this teen called Sally, who is kind of annoying and a bit mysterious, and and she is looking for monuments, these Greek gods who've been hidden for several generations to protect humans, and they need to be moved. And so we kind of go into this. We start in contemporary Sydney, and we quickly slip into a kind of Greek mythological setting where we don't slip into the setting. We kind of slip into this fantasy world underneath this elite private boys' school in Sydney. And Sally and him are looking for monuments, these gods that they need to move. They then meet up with another young guy called Lockie, who is a young Wiradjuri man, and Connor has this massive crush on Lockie. I absolutely loved that this is not a coming out story. Connor is not feeling any angst about the fact that he is gay on any level. I mean, we've done that. Haven't we done that? Haven't we moved past that story? I just loved that the romance in this story was between two boys, and that it's not an issue. This is not an issues book. This is a teen romance book. It's a fantasy adventure set in contemporary Sydney with a romance. Go figure. I mean, but it's not preachy. Will hasn't shoved issues in there to educate while he entertains. He's literally just laid it all on the line and done it with such class. I really want to read you this part where Connor is at a debutante ball. I mean, hello, a debutante ball. It's hilarious. There's a debutante ball in this book. This is like, trying to think of what it reminded me of. This is the kind of book I wanted to read when I was 16. All of the fun stuff, like all of the stuff about pretty ball gowns and stuff, with lots of fun and adventure and romance, contemporary, but it's also got a bit of fantasy and a bit of Greek mythology. Like, it's just perfect. Actually, I'll read you this bit first. When Sally is finding a dress to wear to the debutante ball, where they're kind of going undercover as spies, she walks out, and Connor says this: "She looks stunning. The gown starts with a sweetheart neckline. For some reason, Mum was surprised when I came out of the closet. And the white fabric crosses over at the front and then falls from her waist to the floor. You look amazing." It's just, I don't know, it's clever, it's funny. I've highlighted parts all throughout the book, which I don't normally do, but I I really enjoyed the writing, and I was reading it quite late at night, and I was too lazy to get out of bed and get post-it notes, which I normally do in a book. So I've written all through the flipping book, which means I can't now like give it to my nieces to read or something, but that's okay because this is a book I'm going to keep forever. I think I'll come back to it, and I want to give it to my girls when they're a bit older. Anyway, I wanted to read you this part about Connor when he first sets eyes on Lockie. I have every intention of sticking to the plan at the debutante ball they are. But then I noticed the most gorgeous guy to ever roam the earth. He has an athletic frame and stands relaxed against the radiator, one hand around the opposite forearm. His skin is a deep brown. He talks through a crooked smile. I want to get close enough to hear what he's saying, and if he's keen, marry him. Like, it's funny. It's funny, it's witty, it's sarcastic. It reads very much the way Will speaks. If you've ever had Will as an author at your school, he's really, really funny and sarcastic. It's got some great stuff about being a Greek Australian and all of the family commitments that come with that, but also the beauty of being from a large Greek family where the grandparents are really adored. What else have I written? These are on my notes. I wrote at like 1 a.m. in the morning. There's no coming out angst. Yeah. The romance is just there. What did I say? This is what I really wanted to say to you. This is a YA novel for YA readers. I mean, I'm 43 and I adored it, but it's not aimed at me. It's aimed at an absolutely young adult audience. And I love that. It's just, as I said, it's fun. It's escapist. You know, look, when I first looked at it, I thought, oh gosh, that's not very Will Kostakis. It doesn't look like his last two books, but in fact, it's very much his voice. It's a bit back to where he started with Loathing Lola. It's just a lot of fun. Yeah, it's just great. I wanted to read you a little bit about what the voice of a god sounds like. I really loved this passage. You know, who's ever wondered what a voice would sound like of a god or a monument? I mean, again, why am I writing in my books? Good evening, children. Her speech samples the music of the world, the cry of a caged bird, the thumping gallop of a horse, chopped, warped, and rearranged into words. Her syllables are alive. I love that. So good. Such good writing, really great world building, hilarious that it's set in contemporary Sydney, in private schools. I just feel like it's going to be one of those books which you kind of need to put into the hands of your teens for escapist fun, which is really well written. And yeah, I loved it. So that is all I was going to say. That's all we've got time for. But, you know, I can talk as long as I like because this is just Facebook Live. Next week, I am doing a whole stack of workshops at Brisbane City Council Libraries. I'm really, really honoured. On Monday, I'll be at Brisbane Square Library, and I think there's still some places available for that between 11 and 12. I'm doing story time in the children's section, and I am reading Home by Narelle Oliver, who was a very, very dear friend of mine, and she sadly passed away several years ago. And I feel really honoured, a little bit emotional to have been asked, but I feel really honoured to be reading Home. And I spent last night cutting out 50 pairs of peregrine falcon wings. Narelle would be so proud of me. Actually, she'd be laughing at me. She would never have done that for you, just saying. So we're going to be making peregrine falcon wings based on some of the artwork in her beautiful, beautiful book, Home. And the reason it's at Brisbane Square Library is because the children's section in Brisbane Square Library was inspired by the artwork in Home, which is set in Brisbane. And other fun fact, the school that I work at, St Aidan's, her daughter Jessie went there, and the rowing boats, the St Aidan's rowing boats are also included in Home. And I've got a piece of the artwork, original artwork at my school of the rowing boats with our oars with their stars on them. Also next week, I'm doing a whole stack of workshops with Pete Carnivus, who is a Sunshine Coast author illustrator, and we are doing workshops based on his beautiful, beautiful new book, A Quiet Girl, and we are doing a mindful reading activity. And I'm really looking forward to those. Again, I've been making peaceful dove origami for a few days now in preparation for those workshops, and I did kind of bribe my children yesterday to make some as well, but I'm really looking forward to them. So if you are not super busy next week, I'm not sure if they're all booked out, but you can certainly have a look and see online, and they are all free. Anyway, have a lovely weekend. I'm off to see Celeste Barber on Saturday night, and I'm really excited. See ya.